Focus on Headline. And let's take a look at what major issues are making the headlines today on Focus on Headline. For this, joining us in the studio today, we have our reporters in Yoon-Hae-jung and Sung-Hae-rang. Guys, welcome back.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening to you guys. We're going to start things off with some economic stories, news, I should say. We had the International Monetary Fund, or the IMF, on Tuesday, keeping its 2024 growth outlook for South Korea unchanged. This at 2.5%. They cited a stable global economic expansion. We have other figures from the IMF as well. Nevertheless, Hae-jung, you're going to start us off. Let's get some figures from the IMF.
Sure. The IMF released its World Economic Outlook for October. The IMF releases its outlook 4 times a year in January, April, July, and October. The April and October forecasts are for all member countries, while the January and July forecasts are revised for 30 major economies, including Korea. Now, the most recently released growth outlook for Korea was on par with the organization's projection made in July, which was also 2.5%. Meanwhile, for this year's growth projections, the OECD presented a 2.5% growth for Korea, and the Bank of Korea forecasted a 2.4% growth, while the South Korean government expected the economy to grow 2.6%. Now, for next year, the IMF maintained its July growth forecast for South Korea at 2.2% in October as well. On a side note, Bank of Korea Governor Lee Chang-yong is on a trip to Washington, D.C. this week to attend the G20 Central Bank Governors Meeting and the IMF annual meetings.
The IMF also making some revisions on its forecast for the global economy and some of the other countries as well. Let's get some figures on that too.
Right. The IMF maintained the global growth forecast for year 2024 at 3.2%, while revising down the 2025 forecast by 0.1 percentage point to 3.2%. So the overall outlook is largely unchanged from July's, with some adjustments by region. For major economies, the organization raised the growth forecast for the United States this year by 0.2 percentage points to 2.8%. It attributed the increase to stronger than expected growth in consumption and in non-housing investment. And the U.S. growth for next year is expected to slow to 2.2% as fiscal policy tightens and consumption slows as the labor market cools. Now, for China, the figure was decreased to 4.8% from its earlier July projection of 5%. Next year's numbers for China remains unchanged at 4.5%. China recorded a 5.2% growth in 2023, but growth is gradually declining due to a weak property market and low consumer confidence. Now, moving on to the Eurozone, it's expected to grow 0.8% this year and 1.2% next year. Japan's growth rate for this year was also revised to 0.3%, which is down 0.4 percentage points from July. The decline reflected temporary supply disruptions due to production halts at major auto plants and the surge in tourism, which is fading, which was what helped boost economy in Japan back in 2023. Now, the IMF forecast growth for emerging and developing economies this year and next year stood at 4.2%, the same as in July. Overall, the IMF assessed the downside risks to the global economy as more pronounced than in July. It noted that an escalation in regional conflicts, especially in the Middle East, could pose serious risks for commodity markets, also pointing out that maintaining a tight monetary policy for too long may abruptly worsen global financial conditions.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the IMF figures from was it, back in 2021 to 2022, the numbers were pretty positive for South Korea, given the fact that it's a base effect, right? It was pretty bad in 2020 because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and so there was a nice bounce back. But it is true right now, the South Korean economy at this time, it's a bit unstable at this time, and we do continue to talk about the robust export figures, but domestically, there's very little private consumption going on, and overall, the employment figures are a bit concerning, given the fact that the vast majority of the jobs that are being added are part-time jobs for those in their 60s. But globally, though, the big concern is the major economies, right? The United States. I mean, we're seeing U.S. Growth looking pretty bad, and China has been really struggling in its economy, not to mention Japan, one of the economic powerhouses in the Asian region, seeing a zero. But man, that's a very, very low figure there. So all of this impacted by this, and this is given the fact that there isn't going to be any changes in the geopolitical risk that we're already seeing in areas like Europe and in the Middle East. Let's move on here. Back here in the country, the state-run Korea Electric Power Corporation, or KEPCO, announced on Wednesday that it's going to be raising electricity rates for industrial use while freezing those for households. As this citing a global energy price volatility and escalating financial strains. We talked about KEPCO bleeding money over the years due to the low electricity rates. Arirang, let's get the latest on this.
Sure. The electricity rate for industrial use will rise 9.7% on average on Thursday, while those for households and small stores will remain unchanged. KEPCO explained that the adjustment reflects rising production costs while also taking inflation and the livelihoods of the people into consideration. With the higher electricity rates for industrial use, it will see an additional 4.7 trillion won, or $3.4 billion in revenue annually. And according to the company, it is essential to raise the rates to maintain and repair essential infrastructure and build foundations for cutting-edge industries, including chips and artificial intelligence. In particular, the rate for large businesses will increase by 10.2%, while that for small and medium-sized companies will rise by 5.2%. KEPCO has stated that the decision will affect 1.7% of total users, who account for 53.2% of electricity demand. KEPCO posted a combined loss of 43 trillion won, or $31.1 billion from 2021 to 2023. This was inevitable given that it was unable to raise electricity bills enough to cover high fuel costs amid the pandemic and rising inflation. The company's debt reached 202.9 trillion won by June, a 440 billion won increase from the end of 2023. While electricity bills for households and businesses have become more expensive in recent years, reflecting rising international energy prices, the level of domestic electricity bills, especially for residential use, remains low compared to major economies. In fact, according to data provided by KEPCO, the average Korean residential household consumed 363 kilowatt hours of electricity in August, but electricity prices in Japan, France, the US, and Germany are significantly higher. In Japan and France, electricity prices are more than twice as high, while in the US and Germany, they are 2.5 and 3 times higher, respectively. KEPCO said that it is taking decisive action to address accumulating losses and secure funds for investments in the power grid. It will also continue to implement comprehensive self-risk measures to normalize its financial health.
Yeah, the business and the industries are not very happy with this decision right now, because the Korea Chamber of Commerce and Industries came out earlier today saying that this is not fair. It's going to be doing terrible things for all the industries out there. And instead, they were saying, this isn't supposed to be something that only we are supposed to be burdening. It should be everyone else in this society. You guys continue to give rate cuts on the households, citing inflation and all the different things. And now we're going to take a huge brunt of this. Over 9% increase, they're saying, is too much. But we're talking about large business businesses that are going to be impacted by this. But they did say that it was inevitable that these rate hikes were going to happen, but they did also call on the National Assembly to pass a number of pending bills in order to kind of resolve the energy shortage and, of course, the fact that KEPCO has been bleeding money over the years. Let's talk about South Korea's finance ministry on Wednesday, saying that they will extend the tax cut on fuel by another 2 months, with some adjustments amid the ongoing Middle East crisis. Prices of oil has been going up quite a bit over the past few weeks here, but Haejung, let's get more on this.
According to the Ministry of Economy and Finance, under the latest decision, South Korea will apply a 15% discount on gasoline consumption and a 23% cut on diesel and liquefied petroleum gas. This means that the fuel tax will be 698 Korean won per liter for gasoline, 448 Korean won for petroleum, and 156 Korean won for LPG. South Korea has been applying a 20% discount on gasoline and a 30% discount on diesel and LPG, which were set to expire at the end of this month. So the latest decision means that the fuel tax will be increasing 5 percentage points for gasoline and 7 percentage points for diesel and LPG. The finance ministry said the decision was made by taking into account recent energy and inflation trends, along with the impact on finances. And the updated measure will be implemented November 1st and will run through the end of this year. Now, going back, the government began implementing a fuel tax cut scheme in 2021 and has extended it since then, with the reduction rate being adjusted in accordance with global energy prices. And recently, prices have shown signs of stabilizing, providing a rationale for reducing the fuel tax. Last month, consumer prices were 1.6% higher year on year, bringing the inflation rate back to the 1% range for the first time in 3.5 years since March 2021, when the figure stood at 1.9%. Petroleum products also fell 7.6%, the first decline in 7 months since February this year, and gasoline fell by 8% and diesel by 12%.
Yeah, I think it was like, August of this year when they started, they said they were going to extend the fuel tax cuts, but it was going to be a smaller figure, and then now we're seeing this again. And so overall, though, I mean, I forgot what the calculation was, but it's not that much of a difference, to be honest with you. But what does happen is that it makes a difference for all the delivery trucks, the massive trucks, right? And this, unfortunately, might lead to a slight increase in the inflation overall, not the core inflation. Let's talk more about, speaking of which, inflation. We know that agricultural products have been very, very expensive, where some things like apples, which used to be like the cheapest fruit you can purchase, is no longer. I haven't had apple in a really, really long time. Let's just put it this way. It's also approaching kimjang season, or the kimchi making season, and in lieu of a shortage or the very, very high prices of Napa cabbages that are used to make kimchi, there is going to be some measures put in place by the government. This especially for the consumers who are going to be purchasing the Napa cabbages or other kimchi ingredients at large supermarkets or traditional markets as a whole. Head on, let's get more information on this.
Sure. The government has decided to release 24,000 tons of cabbage to Nongyeop, the South Korean National Agricultural Cooperative Federation. This represents a 10% increase from last year and will ensure a steady supply of cabbage to the Garak market for 28 days during the peak kimchi making season, or kimjang. 1,000 tons of cabbage will be stocked at all times in case of temporary supply shortages due to rainy weather, and 9,100 tons of radish will be provided as well, which is a 14% increase from last year. Ahead of the kimjang season, the government has also taken steps to ensure a sufficient supply by encouraging kimchi producers and processors not to keep too many ingredients in stock and providing incentives later for doing so. In order to meet seasonal demand for seasonings, the government is considering a flexible supply of government reserves, which could include the release deliveries of 1,000 tons of imported chili peppers to chili powder processors in the early stages and 500 tons each of domestic garlic and onions to the wholesale market. The Agriculture Minister Song Mi-ryong said that despite a slight decline in the production of cabbage and radish compared to the previous year, the current supply and demand dynamics suggest that this shouldn't pose a significant concern, particularly in light of the observed trend of declining demand for kimjang. Also, she added that given the fact that the supply of certain ingredients, including red chili powder, green onions, and onions, is sufficient, wholesale and retail prices will remain stable throughout the kimjang season. Also, the government has decided to promote discounts for consumers. So the minister announced that discounts of up to 40% will be offered on vegetables, including cabbage and radish, at supermarkets and traditional markets, with the aim of alleviating the financial burden for consumers. For agricultural products such as cabbage and radish, the government will offer discounts of up to 40% at 18,300 supermarkets and traditional markets across the country. The maximum discount allowed is 20,000 won per person per week at supermarkets and 30,000 won at traditional markets. Pork will be discounted by more than 20%, while raw seafood, including salted and fermented fish and oysters, will be discounted by up to 50%. The government is also planning to promote kimchi making in time for the cabbage harvest, crack down on the illegal distribution of vegetables, and strengthen its safety management measures. In the meantime, People Power Party leader Han Dong-un said the price of cabbage is 80% higher than last year because it didn't grow as much as it should have ahead of kimjang season. He also mentioned that when it comes to agricultural countermeasures, there's often a long wait between implementing policies and seeing results. That is why it's important to keep an eye on what's being done and what still needs to be done to address any concerns the public might have. And according to the PPP floor leader Cho Kyoo-hong, the supply and demand for cabbage is improving thanks in large part to normalized temperatures and active efforts by producers. But there are still worries about whether the cabbage price can be really stabilized compared to previous years. So he asked the government to do its best to stabilize supply and demand.
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to get the same prices as we had before the inflation on all these like Napa cabbages and things like that, but you're trying to minimize the price hikes. And one of the things that the South Korean government did earlier this year in lieu of way before the kimjang season, I think this was like last month, I think it was like, was it September that they did this? They imported a large amount of Chinese Napa cabbages, which, by the way, that affects more the restaurants, right? Because Koreans, when it comes to kimjang season, they refuse to use Chinese Napa cabbages. So this discount actually helps the consumers who are making the kimchi for the kimchi making season, but for the Chinese Napa cabbages, that was more for the restaurants. And so that was like the big concern that if kimchi prices are high, then the restaurants are going to start increasing their menu prices because, you know, they have to make up for all the losses and things like that. But hopefully it's, I mean, we were talking about not too long ago, I think it was like earlier this year that Koreans were eating less kimchi than they used to. So, I mean, I don't know if that's going to affect anything. Let's talk about the prolonged and ongoing medical rift that we're seeing with the government and the medical communities. On Tuesday, the Korean Medical Association, or KMA, the Korea Association of Medical Colleges, said that they're willing to participate in the consultative body comprising of the ruling opposition parties and the medical community. This may be the first step to put an end, finally, to that 8-month-long medical crisis due to the trainee doctors' walkout against the government's plan to increase the medical school quota. However, I don't see Kira in here just yet. Haejung, let's get the latest on this.
Right. The Korean Medical Association, which has announced its intention to participate in this consultative body, is a group to which most specialists belong to, and the Korea Association of Medical Colleges is the body of medical school deans who are in charge of medical education. So hopes are high that talks between the government and the medical community will actually take place. Although the Korean Intern Resident Association came out saying that they would not take part in the talks, still, the two major doctor groups, with their participation, it will be the first time formal dialogue takes place after the 8-month protracted walkout by doctors. Now, the two doctor organizations' decision to join the consultative body was largely driven by pressure to address the growing suffering of patients in prolonged healthcare gaps. And in a statement released on Tuesday, the KMA and KAMC said, "We clearly oppose to the government's unilateral policy push and fully support the young doctors' determination to do the right thing," but added that when we put the health of people and patients first, we can no longer ignore the collapse of Korean healthcare. But of course, even within the medical community, views are divided. Some expect that it could be a step toward resolving the current conflict, while some are concerned that it's just another trick by the government to make the doctors come to the table for dialogue. Now, the consultative body is set to be off to a rough start, as setting the agenda from the outset is a big hurdle. First of all, the medical community and the government are expected to clash over whether to put the 2025 medical school quota up on the agenda for discussion. The medical community has been unwavering in its stance that it will not accept more medical students next year. As such, it has repeatedly called for the 2025 med school quota to be placed on the council's agenda. But the government, on the other hand, stands firm that it cannot cancel the 2025 med school quota, as next year's college entrance processes have already kicked off.
So, right from the start, there's a deadlock already, right? I mean, because this is the big thing. This is the thing that sparked all of this. It was for the 2025 academic year, whether or not there's going to be an increase. And the government, to be fair, though, the government kind of took a step back, right? And they said, well, we'll kind of not necessarily meet you halfway, but we will not go with the 2,000 hike as we were initially planning. And so it was a little less than 2,000, but still the medical community was like, no. 0 is a number. I mean, that's, pretty far-fetched, right? When the government continues to say that they're not going to, take part in, the government continues to say, no, it's finalized now, 2025. Even that was like the big rift, right? Even with the presidential office and PPP leader Han Dong-hoon, because Han Dong-hoon was kind of like, all right, I think things are getting really bad here. Maybe we need to approach this a different way and maybe reconsider the 2025 academic year. And the presidential office just kind of said no. And then, they canceled a whole bunch of meetings and things like that. But here's the thing. You could have all these people, all these groups, take part in this consultative body, which, by the way, this consultative body is in order to kind of figure out what the shortage and the number of doctors and medical personnels are. And, of course, the doctor is going to say that we need 0. We need 0 additional doctors. So, again, another deadlock. But the problem is, remember, the vast majority of the doctors who are out on this prolonged walkout are the interns and residents. I mentioned earlier that there was no mention of Kira whatsoever. And in fact, Kira's coming out saying that they're not going to be including any representatives from this particular association. Arirang, let's get more on this.
Sure. Park Dan, head of the Emergency Steering Committee of the Korean Intern Resident Association, or KIRA, made it clear on social media on Tuesday that he has no intention of participating in a consultative body that is just a complete sham. It has 3 more names on it: Son Jung-ho, Kim So-young, Jo Ju-shin, the chairpersons of the Emergency Steering Committee of the Korean Medical Student Association, or KMSA. On Tuesday, the KAMS and the KAMC announced they will participate in consultations with the ruling and opposition parties and fulfill their responsibilities as an expert organizations. While the 2 organizations have decided to join the bipartisan consultative body, other medical organizations are still paying attention to the situation closely. Meanwhile, the Korean Medical Association, or KMA, has made it clear that it will not take part in the consultative body. In a statement, the KMA expressed respect for the decision of both organizations and asked that they exercise discretion to ensure that the views of the entire medical community are well represented. They also said they look forward to a consultation that reflects the needs of residents and medical students, and they extend their support to both organizations despite their concerns.
So even a couple of months ago, when there was this huge deadlock, right, and it seemed like there was going to be some sort of resolution to all this, where the government, I think the KMA came out saying that, all right, let's try to work this out. Let's have a meeting and stuff like that. And then Kira came out and said, whoa. It's us who are on a walkout right now. You guys are still working right now. You guys are not meeting our demands. and also kind of lashed out on the government for only talking to the other medical communities. But I mean, it's also Kira's fault. I mean, Kira's not taking part in any of these dialogues. So they're pretty set. Park Dan has made it clear from the very, very, very start, months ago, that unless the government scraps the medical school admissions quota and starts the dialogue from square one, that they're not going to take part in any of this. So again, I mean, you could build all these consultative bodies and all these committees and stuff like that, but if Kira is not going to take part in this is the problem. This is the problem that you're seeing when there's a bunch of all these different medical groups and association, and you're not getting a unified answer here. Let's move on here. The other big concern has been over the past few weeks things regarding North Korea and its sort of military alliance. It seems to be forming with Russia, and it's growing over each day. According to a South Korean military assessment, North Korea is believed to have secured military supplies that could last up to 3 months in the event of a war, and is running its munitions factory at full capacity in order to support its good old friend Russia. Haejung, let's get the details of this.
Right. North Korea is estimated to have secured enough war supplies, including weapons, to last about 1 to 3 months of war. The assessment was included in an analysis carried out by the intelligence unit in Seoul's defense ministry and was released Wednesday by the office of the ruling People Power Party representative Kang Dae-sik. The intelligence unit assessed that Pyongyang's arms export to Russia did not have a huge impact on the regime's war reserve stocks, taking into account the export volume, its amount of storage, and ammunition production capacity. The unit, however, did note that it is possible that the North Korean military may face a shortage of training ammunition supply, resulting disruption in drills if the arms exports continue in a greater volume. The North, which is presumed to operate some 200 munitions factories capable of manufacturing major weapons and ammunition, is believed to be running the plants producing weapons for exports to Russia in full capacity. But the Defense Ministry's unit did note that accurate analysis is limited, as many of the major munitions factories are fortified underground. And the South Korean military estimates over 20,000 containers to have been transported to Russia via the North's Najin port. And if all the containers were to be fully stocked with 152 millimeter shells, they would amount to some 9.4 million rounds. The Defense Ministry's unit also added that Russia is using North Korean missiles on the battlefield, and the United States and South Korea are jointly continuing to track them, saying that compatible 122 millimeter radiation shells, T-series tank shells, portable anti-aircraft missiles, and anti-tank missiles are also likely to have been supplied. And what's also interesting, according to the unit's findings, is that U.S., European, and Japanese-made components were recently identified in the wreckage of a suspected North Korean missile used on the battlefield in Ukraine. Now, this implies that when North Korea found it difficult to obtain semiconductors, which are banned under international sanctions, it removed the related components from commercial goods and used them in its weapons. So the use of commercial commodities in the Ukrainian battlefields underscores the low precision and reliability of North Korean-made weapons, according to the intelligence unit.
Yeah, initially when there were reports that North Korea was exporting ballistic missiles over to the war in Ukraine, they were saying something like out of 40 missiles, something like 15 of them didn't even work. And so that's a pretty low percentage, right? Or high percentage of failure, if you put it this way. And so even North Korea, when it does conduct its ballistic missile tests, sometimes it fails. And when you're sending a whole bunch of them, the chances of failure is going to increase that much more. But the Russia, it's desperate times for Russia right now. I mean, they're falling short of munitions. They can get all the help as possible, but there is no other help other than North Korea right now, which is why it's a good opportunity in some ways for North Korea. Speaking of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has once again called for enhancing the country's war deterrence, this including the readiness of its nuclear capabilities in response to what he described as growing nuclear threats from the United States. Haerang, fill us in on the latest.
Right. According to the Korean Central News Agency, or KCNA, Kim made the remarks during his inspection of strategic missile bases. The report didn't specify the location or the date of the inspection. Kim said that, as has been highlighted on a number of recent occasions, the U.S. strategic nuclear capabilities present an ever-increasing threat to the security environment of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. And then he added, in order to address this long-term threat, it's imperative that the DPRK enhances its nuclear deterrence capabilities and implements a comprehensive and strict counteraction strategy against nuclear forces. And according to the KCNA, during the inspection, Kim confidently reviewed the key functions and capabilities of the missile bases launch facilities, as well as the operational readiness of the strategic missile units. He also underscored the potential benefits of further modernizing and reinforcing the missile bases, with the aim of ensuring that all facilities are fully prepared to maintain a robust counteraction posture. Meanwhile, in recent weeks, North Korea has taken actions that have the potential to heighten tensions in the region, particularly ahead of the upcoming U.S. election, which is just 2 weeks away. These actions include the disclosure of a uranium enrichment facility, the launch of ballistic missiles, and the sending of balloons carrying trash across the border.
Yeah, so that's what President Yoon Suk-yeol was saying, right, a couple of weeks ago, that the fact that they disclosed their uranium enrichment facilities in order to kind of, turn the attention over to them amid the upcoming U.S. Presidential election. But I mean, there was different, analysis coming out. Some people are saying they're forecasting that North Korea was going to, conduct their 7th nuclear test in light of the U.S. Presidential elections. But then some more people are saying, well, is that going to benefit Kamala Harris, or is that going to benefit Trump? And everyone's like, oh, it's going to benefit Trump. And then Kim Yo-jong came out and said, no, we don't care about the U.S. presidential elections because whoever gets picked as the president, things are not going to change because of the current political situation over in the United States. But again, there are some people who are saying that with Trump coming close, I don't even know how close they got with striking a deal over in Hanoi, to be honest with you. He might be going back into trying to talk to Kim Jong-un again. But as Professor Brian Myers said yesterday, priority right now in the United States is what's going on over in Ukraine and also in the Middle East. Let's talk about, speaking of Ukraine, according to Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, North Korea is preparing 2 brigades, each consisting of 6,000 North Korean troops, while the U.S. claims it's still analyzing reports of North Korean troop deployment to Russia, which is kind of unusual that they're taking this long in order to confirm whether or not these reports are true. And of course, there's been speculation that they're kind of not really trusting the South Korean intel information, right? But they shot that down. Haejang, let's get the latest on what's going on with the U.S.
Now, what President Vladimir Zelensky said is similar to an analysis made by South Korea's National Intelligence Service that North Korea has decided to deploy a total of 12,000 troops in 4 brigades, including special forces. And during a speech on Tuesday local time, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky said that while the troop deployment poses a challenge for Ukraine, its military knows how to respond to it, stressing that it's crucial that its allies do not shy away from the recent developments. Zelensky went on to express his gratitude to all the countries that have condemned Pyongyang for its military support for Russia, emphasizing that the world is interested in ending the war and not prolonging it. Meanwhile, Washington says the process is still underway to verify reports of North Korea's deployment of troops. According to the U.S. State Department's deputy spokesperson, Vedant Patel, the U.S. has its own processes in place and its own assessments that it needs to make before making any public comments. He stressed that the lack of confirmation on Seoul's intel regarding the North Korean troop deployment is not a reflection of its lack of confidence. But when asked if any discussions are taking place over what measures should be taken in response to Pyongyang's troop deployment, Patel did not comment. However, he did say that if the reports are true, the regime's troop support for Russia would be incredibly dangerous. But there are additional updates that point to North Korea sending sending over its troops to support Russia. On Tuesday local time, the head of the main intelligence agency of the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense said the first North Korean troops will soon arrive in Russia's Kursk region, where they will assist the Russian army. On top of that, a video clip showing a group of soldiers is believed to be North Koreans that are dispatched to Russia, and this has been released on social media. Astra, a Russian media outlet, posted a video showing a number of soldiers appearing to be North Korean forces, and the outlet said that the soldiers have arrived at a Russian ground forces base in a town in Russia's far eastern city of Vladivostok. And just before the show, we had some recent updates rolling in on this issue. As of Wednesday afternoon, South Korea's spy agency said that North Korea has deployed an additional 1,500 soldiers to support Russia. So far, a total of 3,000 North Korean troops has been sent over to support Russia. And according to reports, probably 10,000 of the planned North Korean troops will be fully deployed by the end of December. And what's also interesting is that in Pyongyang, families of the soldiers are being moved to separate locations to be isolated from just regular residents.
Yeah, you could speculate a number of things in regards to this, right? There's concerns maybe that amongst North Koreans or the North Korean officials that the North Korean soldiers are going to start running away and stuff like that, because I mean it's almost like a death sentence to be in the front lines. If you look at the figures that came out, they're saying that on average since the war broke out, something like 120 or so Russian soldiers have been dying on a daily basis. And so when you're saying that something like 12,000 troops are going to be deployed, that's like 100 days that they can probably survive. And you're talking about front lines. And so is it going to be that big of a help? We don't know. And we kind of question, how strong the North Korean soldiers are, given the fact that most of them have done like agricultural stuff. But special forces, there's a lot of big questions on special forces. Tuesday, China's Xi Jinping, India's Narendra Modi, and other world leaders arrived in the Russian city of Kazan for a summit of the BRICS. This is an interesting one. The Kremlin is hopeful that the summit will serve as a platform for discussing ways to navigate global affairs in a manner that's unduly influenced by Western interests. So we're seeing, again, teams forming here. Arirang, tell us more about this summit.
Sure. Russian President Vladimir Putin will use the 3-day meeting to show the world that U.S.-led efforts to isolate Russia over its actions in Ukraine have failed. Kremlin Foreign Affairs advisor has called it the largest foreign policy event ever held by Russia, with 36 countries attending and more than 20 of them represented by heads of state. BRICS stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. The grouping, often referred to as a counterweight to the Western-led world, has expanded to include Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, and the United Arab Emirates. So Putin engaged in discussions with a number of key leaders on the subject of Ukraine. For a starter, welcoming the Chinese President Xi Jinping, Putin described the relationship between Moscow and Beijing as one of the main stabilizing factors on the world stage. And he also said that he wanted to further expand coordination in all multilateral platforms to ensure global security and a fair world order. She also extended a warm greeting to Putin, describing their relationship as one of deep friendship between two countries. He said the world is undergoing profound changes unseen in a century, and the international situation is complex and interconnected. And then it noted that China-Russia ties have provided a significant boost to the development, revitalization, and modernization of both countries.
Yeah, but China is refusing to help Russia in this prolonged war in Ukraine. This is an interesting group, right? BRICS. It's kind of like their answer to like the G7. Especially ever since it used to be the G8, and then Russia got kicked out because of their, the annexation of the Crimea Peninsula. But nevertheless, this is all the time that we have for now, guys. Thank you very much for your reports. Have a safe one. Stay warm, by the way. It's very cold outside. And we'll see you guys again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You can listen to Korea Now with me, SJ Lee, by downloading the Arirang Radio application, or tune in online by visiting www.arirangradio.com. So make sure you tune in Mondays through Fridays, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Korea time.